I was in my tent, and it was the middle of the night, perhaps 1 a.m. I had woken up to go to the bathroom, just like normal. I was about to unzip the tent when I heard a small scratching sound. I paused. It was a slow, deliberate, crunchy, digging sound. It was too rhythmic for an animal, so after making sure that it wasn't my dad who was sharing the tent with me, I unzipped a corner of the door and peeked out. The moon was just bright enough for me to see a young woman squatting right next to our little two-man tent, digging at the ground with her bare hands. My dad went and shined a flashlight on her and told her to go back to wherever she had made a camp. The woman got up slowly and silently, leaving a 4-inch deep hole next to the tent, and started walking away. I went outside, went to the bathroom, and got back into my sleeping bag. A few minutes later, I was awoken by a clattering sound of a person or an animal walking around where we had put our stuff. I looked outside again, and the woman was crouched low, walking around our stuff and looking at things. She was moving the way that a monkey might. My father stepped out of the tent, shined the flashlight on her again, and she faced him. He asked her to kindly leave their stuff alone, but she just stood there, dirty and neglected looking, but clearly not malnourished, just staring into his light. Eventually he gave up, and we went back into our tent. Soon we heard her digging again at her little hole, which was literally 6 inches and 2 pieces of thin nylon away from my head. I shouted at her to go away, and she ran away in an animalistic kind of fashion and never returned. I fell back asleep, and in the morning our stuff was scattered, but nothing was stolen. I was backpacking in New Hampshire and camped out for the night after a day hike. I wandered off from our fire to go to the bathroom and stumbled upon a circle etched into the ground with tuning forks surrounding the circle, standing up straight. It looked like a creepy ritual circle, and it bugged me out, so I booked it back to the group. It's not the longest story, but it's something that deeply unsettled me in a way I can't explain. I still don't know what it was, and sometimes I still think about it. I work in the outdoor field and lead trips regularly. I once led a trip to the top of Mount Stringer in North Carolina. It's a tough climb to get to the top and about 6 miles from the nearest road. I was leading a group of 8 middle school kids and had 1 co-instructor. We were camping out on top of the mountain, and it was a beautiful night with a full moon. The kids and the other co-instructor went to bed in their tents. I chose to spend the night in a hammock that night. I was really into a book I was reading, so I stayed up and read until about 10:30 p.m. I turned my headlamp off to settle in for the night. Everything around me was rather bright from the moon, and from the position I was in, I could see down the trail that we had hiked to get to the top. I laid there, enjoying the scenery, and noticed something moving on the trail. Bears are common in that area, so I perked up. As it got closer, I could tell it was a person. We were in the middle of nowhere, and there was someone hiking up the trail with no headlamp or any gear. I was just frozen, watching this person move closer to our camp. The person arrived at the top of the mountain where we were and just stopped. I watched as what appeared to be a man surveyed our camp. I really could only see the outline of him. He stood there for what seemed like 30 minutes, but might have been 10. He then turned and sat down under a tree facing our camp. He was sitting up in a way that told me he wasn't trying to sleep. He just sat there, staring at the camp. I had no idea what to do. I had decided to just wait it out. I waited, just staring at the man, while he stared directly at our camp. This went on until about 3:30 in the morning. Then he stood up, took a moment to survey my camp a few minutes longer, and then went back down the trail the way he had come up on it. I, to this day, have no idea what that was all about, but it freaked me out. I was paranoid that we were being followed for the rest of the trip. I woke up in the morning while camping and walked out of the tent to find a sheep ripped apart and scattered across a 20-foot area about 10 feet from our campsite. This would be disturbing to anybody, but the creepy part is that this was in the Mourne Mountains in Northern Ireland. There aren't any wild predators there bigger than a fox, and certainly nothing big enough to tear a sheep to shreds. It left me thinking for years after that, what in the world had come near the campsite and torn up that sheep? I had been out stargazing and was sleeping out in a park near town. No tent, just a sleeping bag and a sleeping pad. This was a fairly popular area for joggers, walkers, and the like. I had found a nice spot in a field a few hundred meters from the top, obscured by tall grass and brush, but with a nice view of the valley below and the mountains in the distance. It was so nice. I saw some shooting stars, heard coyotes singing in the distance, and slept very well since it was a warm summer night. In the morning, at the crack of dawn, I was woken up by one of the strangest performances I've ever witnessed. Above me, on the hill, I could hear some kind of chanting. Due to my concealed location, I couldn't actually see what was going on, and I wasn't keen on moving to get a better vantage point, lest I be seen by the group. A man's loud and deep voice was half chanting, half shouting, in a language I couldn't identify. It sounded like a Latin-derived language, but was definitely not Spanish, although he did keep repeating a word which sounded similar to Diablo, which is Spanish for the devil. There were other voices too, but he was clearly leading whatever was happening up there. Eventually, he finished his chant, and there were some cheers and whoops, and then the entire group silently departed. After waiting a while to make sure it was clear, I went up to where the sound had come from. There was no physical evidence of whatever had happened. I asked everybody in town if they had any idea what I might have heard, and nobody had ever heard anything like it. To this day, one of my greatest regrets is not peeking out of my hiding spot to see what the heck was going on, but then again, maybe I'm glad I didn't. A couple of years ago, my brother bought a large piece of land out in the middle of nowhere, about 30 miles or so from cell phone reception. It's quiet, there is no light pollution, no paved roads, and not a lot of people around. Shortly after he bought the place, our families spent a weekend camping on the land and doing our best to clean it up. On the second night we camped there, I woke up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom. As I was walking to the bushes in the dark, I realized that I could faintly hear music. This didn't strike me as odd because I knew my brother had a radio in his camper. I finished up and went back to sleep with no further thought on the matter. The next morning at breakfast, I mentioned the radio and music. Several other people recalled waking up that night and hearing music. The interesting thing is that no two people heard the same music. Finally, the brother who bought the radio woke up. I asked him about the music, and he seemed a little bit freaked out. He woke up sometime during the night and went outside to take a smoke. He heard music as well and had assumed it was someone else. I should mention that he was the only one with a generator and a radio. It wasn't his radio we heard, and it wasn't anyone else's either, because nobody else had one. I've been back several times, but I am a little freaked out by that place at night. I have fun while I'm there, but I'm almost always armed, and I don't sleep in a tent anymore. I sleep in my SUV with the doors locked. It may seem kind of dumb, but realizing that everyone heard different music when there are no people, no functional radios, and no electricity is quite creepy. When I was younger, probably like 10 or 11, I went camping with my family. It was about 1 or 2 in the morning, and I couldn't really sleep. The tent that my brother and I were in was really hot and very uncomfortable. Anyway, while I was trying to go to sleep, I heard a very faint whimper. I tried to ignore it because I figured I was just tired, or maybe there was an animal nearby. Our campsite was along a road with many other campers nearby as well, so I dismissed it. The whimper started to get louder, and then it turned into crying. A short while later, I heard footsteps outside of our tent and a girl crying. Now let me tell you, it didn't go faint. It got louder and louder and remained in the same spot the entire time. I felt that this was important because it indicated that she was looking at our tent site, crying. But it gets worse. After a little bit, the crying turned into a full-on scream for a few seconds, and then it just cut out. When she started screaming, my brother woke up. We both looked at each other and just got all the pillows and stuffed our heads under them. I couldn't sleep all that night. I'm just glad that we left the next morning, but I still have no idea what I heard. This happened to me when I was little. I went camping with my older brother and my mom. I was about 7 or 8, and I went to bed at around 10 p.m. in a sleeping bag inside my tent with both my mom and my brother. At some point during the night, I don't know exactly when, I woke up. But when I woke up, I realized that I was in the middle of the woods, still in my sleeping bag. I had no idea where I was, and I couldn't find my tent anywhere. I screamed for my mom, and I heard her calling back for me in a panic, but she was easily 100 yards away or so. To this day, I have no idea how I ended up in the middle of the woods, still inside my sleeping bag. It gives me the chills. About a month ago, we were riding ATVs on a favorite trail up near Camp Verde. My oldest son is leading, the youngest is following him, a friend is behind him, and I'm taking up the rear. We come over a hill, and I see my youngest son with all of his gear off and his jersey. I came up asking what was wrong, thinking that he had crashed. He said that his back was on fire. I looked, and there were 3 scratches across his back that looked like claw marks. No blood, but very distinct. He had a chest and back protector on, so there's no way that a tree branch or anything could have gotten to him. We finally got him geared back up and headed out. About 30 minutes later, we reached a spot where we always stop for a break. I asked him to take the jersey off so I could look at the scratches once more. They were completely gone. I was backpacking in the Beartooth Wilderness in the early 2000s with a good friend of mine. 3 days into the hike, we had only seen one other couple. On the 3rd night, at about 4 o'clock in the morning, we were awoken in our tent to what sounded like screams in the forest. Big, guttural screams. We've spent plenty of time in the woods, and we know what most of the animals sound like, but we had never heard anything like this. Obviously, we were freaked out, sitting in the tent, not knowing what was out there. Then we started to hear what sounded like hail for about 15 minutes, followed by heavy footsteps near our camp. My friend and I started yelling and making a ton of noise, and the commotion outside the tent slowly came to a halt. In the morning, after not sleeping at all, we unzipped the tent to the creepiest scene I have ever witnessed. All around the tent were literally thousands of little pebbles that had not been there the evening before. They didn't look like any of the terrain near us either. Surrounding the tent in a near perfect circle were 20 or so boulders that had to have weighed 150 to 300 pounds each. My friend and I noped out of there, making a 3-day hike into one, practically running the entire way back to the car. This past winter, I hiked one of the high peaks in the Adirondacks with a buddy of mine and camped out overnight. Everything was fine the entire first day we were there. Had a great night's sleep and woke up early to hike back to the parking area. On the way back down the trail, my friend and I noticed that someone else had been hiking as well. About a mile after walking, I stopped and looked at something on the side of the road. My full name, first and last, was drawn into the snow on the side of the footpath. I didn't do it, and neither did my friend. It was snowing through the night, and if it was drawn the day before, the snow would have been covered up. I figured that whoever it was had to be close. We got a bit freaked out and decided to hustle back to the car so we could get the heck out of there. We finally get back to the parking area, and I go to sign myself out of the registry book. When I turn the page to where I signed in, I see that somebody, or something, had scribbled out all of my information to where you couldn't read it anymore. Had I gone missing, nobody would ever have known that I was there in the first place. No one else had signed into the book besides myself for 3 days. I will not be going back there. It was in the summer, around dusk, and I was camping at a remote campground with my dad. There was a lake right next to the grounds, and my dad and I would trailblaze through the forest right next to the lake, because if you went far enough, there was a really pretty waterfall. A few strange things happened on this hike. We found a slash pile that had a little kid's shoe on top. When we came to a small clearing, my dad had to take a leak, so he faced one side of the clearing and I faced the other. We both heard a child clearly say, "I'm over here." My dad thought it was me, but when he realized it wasn't, we spent a half an hour looking for what we assumed was a lost child, but we found nobody. After that, we gave up on going to the waterfall and started to make our way back to camp, but there were clear sounds of something following us. Twigs were snapping, bushes were shaking, but upon investigation we could never find anything or anyone. We haven't been camping there since. I was in the woods with 3 friends at night. A friend's house was nearby to where we were staying, and I was getting hungry, so I went inside to find some food. Another friend came inside with me. 2 friends were still outside. Later, one of the 2 comes in and sees the indoor friend on the couch next to me, panic, and immediately run back outside. I poke my head out to ask what's going on, only to hear my friends screaming as loud as they can, "That's not Kevin! That's not Kevin!" Everyone comes inside and calms down a little bit, and the story finally comes out. They thought that the friend who was indoors with me, Kevin, had been outside with them this entire time. Why? Because in the darkness of the woods they saw a silhouette about the same height walking alongside them silently. Then at some point it ran away and they were chasing it, thinking that Kevin was running off for some reason. The reason that my friend yelled, "That's not Kevin," was to stop the last outdoor friend from chasing whoever was out there deeper into the woods. We still have no idea who or what it was and why they never spoke. I was camping and some of the group had gone off on a late night stroll. After a while, me and a friend got bored and decided to go look for them. It was pretty much rolling grassland hills with a few trees out there, so we figured that it wouldn't be hard. It was also unearthly quiet, other than the occasional distant owl or coyote, so we were whispering and being very chill. There was pretty good moonlight too, so we hadn't brought lights with us. Anyway, I finally see someone standing under a tree on the crest of this hill. I got up there first. I called out quietly to one of the group that we were trying to find, but I didn't get a response. I called again. No response. Kind of annoyed, I just strut up there, but I'm realizing, subconsciously at least, that something looks weird about the person I've been seeing. They're holding their arms over their head and the proportions aren't right, but I don't think any of that registered in my consciousness because I didn't slow down until I got close enough to see that it wasn't a person at all. It was a coyote that someone had flayed and strung up to the tree by the limbs like some kind of totem. I literally fell backwards in shock. As it turns out, the woman who owned the property was no fan of coyotes coming after her livestock. She also woke us all up in the middle of the night with sustained AR-15 fire, like 20 shots. Someone who lived near her just said, "Oh, she must have found a whole pack of them. Go back to sleep." It might not have been paranormal in nature, but it was still one of the creepiest camping experiences I've ever had. My friend told me this story about what happened to her cousin when he was in Saudi Arabia. Let's call the cousin R. R was working and studying in Saudi Arabia at the time. His closest friends were 5 guys of mostly different nationalities, but pretty much all of them were religious Muslims. One night, they had about a week off from their studies, so they decided to drive to a desert and camp there for the night. They got in their car and drove until they found a spot that they liked. R set up the tent and set a bonfire, and after that, he felt pretty tired. So he took a bag of chips and sat down on the ground opposite his friend. Let's call his friend G. G was not doing much. He was just quietly sitting on the other side of the bonfire, not saying a word. R didn't feel like talking, so he didn't budge him. G's lips curled into a smile. The smile was followed by a wide grin, and soon G was chuckling to himself. "What's so funny?" R asked. No response. Soon, G's chuckling turned into giggling. Giggling turned into laughing. And then R was seriously freaked out because G began to laugh like a maniac and borderline started screaming at him with his eyes wide open. For some reason, he kept looking over at the sky while cackling. R tried to talk to him, even pushed him a couple of times to snap him out of it, but G would not stop laughing. Not even to stop and take a breath or even wheeze. It was like he couldn't run out of air. R felt panic settling in and walked to the car quickly where his other friends were. They noticed he was really freaked out, and they had heard G's laughing and was wondering what was going on. R looked into the car and saw G sleeping in there. Somehow, G was both near the bonfire, screaming bloody murder, and also in the back seat, calmly sleeping like nothing was happening. All of the guys remembered him leaving the car and helping with the tent very clearly. There was no way he could ever be in there. Now, I'm not Muslim myself, but being Albanian, I was raised around Islam, and my best friend is a very devout Sufi, so I know a handful of things, and one of them is that jinns can take the shape of other people if they want to. My best friend has told me multiple stories of that happening in the city that he's from. It looked like the guys were thinking the same thing, and they just didn't know which one was the real G, the G that was laughing outside, or the one that was sleeping in the back seat. So they just said screw it and got in the car, trying to keep calm so they didn't let the jinn or whatever it was know that they were scared out of their mind. They got out the auxiliary cord, and one of them played Islamic prayer songs on the car stereo. That woke the sleeping G up, and he sat up, rubbing his eyes and asking what was going on and why they were playing those songs. The guys just shrugged and said, "Nothing, dude, just felt like praying a little is all." At that moment, backseat G started silently weeping. At first, he was just shedding some tears and just Laughing G went from grinning to screaming. Backseat G went from tearing up to wailing. R turned the stereo's volume up, and they could hear the laughter was sounding more and more muffled before there was a sudden loud thud that shook the ground, followed by what R said that sounded like 1,000 voices screaming at once. G had stopped weeping. Then everything fell dead silent. You couldn't even hear the wind. Not even the ringing that you get in your ears after you've heard something very loud. Nothing but the stereo could be heard. They looked outside the window, and Laughing G had disappeared. The fire was almost out, and the brand new tent looked in bad shape. The guys noped out of there and floored it back to town. In the following couple of months, everything seemed to go wrong for these guys. Bad fortune followed them at every step. R nearly lost his studying grant, for example, and it all culminated when G got into a very nasty car accident and went into a coma. When he woke up and finally got his speech back, he was not the same at all. Tired of all of this and still in need of an explanation, they decided to pay their theology professor a visit and ask him about what could have happened. Upon hearing the occurrence, the professor was mortified. He told the guys that they were in huge trouble and that they had tried to camp in land inhabited by powerful jinns and that the jinns were not pleased at all. The professor informed the staff, and all of the boys were expelled from the university permanently in fear that they could be dangerous to fellow students as well. R is doing okay now. He came back home, and while he still has a bit of bad luck and a lot of nightmares about a laughing double of his friend, he's fine. What messed me up, though, was one of the other friends. We'll call him S. He had broken his leg after being expelled, but had managed to get a scholarship to another university that he was really enjoying. However, at some point, the bad luck started happening again, and he risked losing his scholarship. So he asked his friend E, who dabbled in traditional magic, for some protection. E said sure, no problem, and was okay with helping S out, even after he told him about the desert event and the danger he could be in. E made some sort of protective amulet for S. Exactly a week after S got the amulet, E got into a car crash and died. His head was sliced right off. Not even a single bit of flesh connecting it to the body. The amulet disappeared. Welcome back. I hope you guys enjoyed those stories. I think there are 2 that I have previously recorded on this channel, but it was not a really long time ago. I only started my channel in February, but it was back in the early days, and I wanted to re-record them because I like them so much, and they fit really well into this series, or this set of stories. I was also looking for that story about the guy who was camping and was followed by the bells in the woods, because that one just keeps me up at night sometimes. So I think some stories are worth repeating, but the large majority of these I don't believe I have read on my channel before. So I hope you guys enjoyed those stories. I will be back soon with a video all about Ouija board stories, which I think somebody requested a while ago. So I will be back with that video shortly. I do hope you guys enjoyed this set of stories. If you like the content here, be sure and hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications by clicking the bell. And if you did like this story, feel free to like, comment, share it. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks so much for being here. Bye for now.